The sun dipped low behind the shattered skyline of what was once downtown Boston, casting long shadows across the barricaded streets now known as Zone D, one of the last human strongholds standing against the undead tide. Sandbags, rusted fencing, and makeshift watchtowers marked the perimeter, a fragile shell against the chaos that festered beyond. Inside, a war-weary resistance moved like clockwork, tight, trained, and tense. Among them was Captain Elias Ward, a former military strategist turned field commander, whose name still carried weight among the dwindling survivors. His eyes scanned a faded map pinned to a cracked concrete wall, marked with red zones, safe corridors, and an ominous blinking beacon, an emergency signal activated just 30 minutes ago from Sector 9, deep within the decayed heart of the city. No one had sent a signal from there in over a year. He turned toward his team. There was Marla, the no-nonsense demolitions expert who never missed a chance to challenge orders. Beside her stood Nico, barely 20, but sharp with a drone controller and unmatched when it came to surveillance. And finally, Dr. Celine Ray, once a CDC researcher, now the last living virologist believed to hold any understanding of the infection. Together they made up Vanguard Squad 6, tasked with impossible missions in no-return zones. Elias's voice was steady as he spoke. "Someone's alive out there. We move at first light." Marla crossed her arms. "That sector is overrun. It's a suicide run, sir." "Maybe," Elias replied. "But if someone's out there, if someone triggered that beacon, we owe it to them, and to ourselves, to find out why." As night fell, the silence was broken only by distant groans and the occasional rattling fence. The infected didn't sleep. They wandered. And in dead zones they moved like rivers, thousands of them dragging limbs, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. From their rooftop command post, Nico launched a surveillance drone. The camera fed live images to a flickering screen, ruined buildings, overturned buses, and streets choked with decay. Then, movement. A figure. Alive. Human. Trapped inside an old parking garage waving a flare. Sector 9 wasn't empty anymore. The next morning, Elias led his squad through a breached subway tunnel, bypassing the more infested streets above. The tunnel walls were coated with mildew and scorched flesh, remnants of a failed flamethrower defense years earlier. They moved quietly, flashlights barely flickering on the damp stone. Suddenly a sound, scratching. Echoes bounced unnaturally around them. Marla paused. "Something's here." A deafening screech cut through the dark as two infected lunged from a collapsed stairwell, their bodies twisted and faster than usual. Elias shoved Celine behind him and opened fire, the sound thunderous in the closed space. Marla threw a flare, briefly illuminating the tunnel in red light. The creatures hissed and retreated momentarily. "They're getting smarter," Celine whispered, her voice tight with dread. "These aren't like the others." "Move," Elias barked. They pushed forward, emerging into the morning haze at the base of Sector 9's southern edge. The flare seen last night had burned out, but signs of movement remained. Shoe prints. Drag marks. Blood, but not enough for death. "Whoever lit that beacon was moving," Elias said. "And we're close." Zone D command crackled in over the radio. "Vanguard 6, status report. You're entering classified dead zone territory." Elias replied, "We've made contact with signs of life. Pursuing." They entered the parking structure cautiously. The scent of mold and rust filled their lungs. It was silent, eerily so. A half-eaten ration pack lay on the ground beside a medical bag. Celine bent to examine it. "Military issue. Recent." A sudden clatter made them all turn. A metal pipe rolled across the floor from the second level. Nico raised his rifle. "Hello." From the shadows emerged a girl, no older than 16. Pale, wild-eyed, but very much alive. Her clothes were torn, but she held a sharpened piece of rebar like a weapon. "Don't shoot," she cried. "I didn't mean to, please don't shoot." Elias lowered his weapon slowly. "We're not here to hurt you. We saw your beacon. Are you alone?" Tears welled in her eyes. "No. My brother, he's still up there. He's hurt. We got separated when they came. They're still inside." Marla cursed under her breath. "Of course they are." Elias looked to his team. The mission had just shifted. Not only was there someone to rescue, but whatever was hunting them inside this structure might not be ordinary. And if they were evolving, adapting, then the last battleground wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about learning how to win. "Gear up," he ordered. "We go higher." And with that, Vanguard Squad 6 prepared to face what waited above, not knowing that within those crumbling walls, A new breed of terror was already watching, waiting, learning. The stairwell groaned beneath their weight as Elias led the squad upward, each step echoing like a war drum in the silence. The girl, who'd introduced herself as Ivy, clung close to Celine, her voice trembling as she whispered, "We were scavenging. Just me and my brother, Caleb. He's strong but he took a hit to the leg. I don't know how bad it is." Her words were rushed, desperate. Celine squeezed her shoulder gently. "We'll find him." Marla kept her rifle raised, sweeping corners with sharp precision. "Something's off," she murmured. "This place feels wrong." On the second floor, signs of chaos littered the space. Broken office furniture, blood-smeared walls, and bite marks etched into every surface. Yet what caught their attention most was the silence. Not a single infected had attacked since entering the structure, and that was unnatural. Nico's fingers flew across his wrist pad, checking thermal readings from his portable scanner. "They're here," he muttered, "but they're not moving." Elias frowned. "What do you mean not moving?" "Stationary, like they're waiting." They pushed forward, senses on high alert. Ivy led them to a small break room where Caleb had last been seen. As they entered, a guttural growl rattled the air. Elias raised his weapon, but it was Caleb, not infected but barely conscious, slumped against the wall with a makeshift splint on his leg. Blood pooled beneath him, but his eyes were lucid. "You found her," Caleb rasped. "They're here. Watching. They don't come unless you run." Elias knelt, inspecting the wound. "Bite?" "No," Celine said quickly after checking. "Laceration. Metal shard. He's not infected." Before anyone could breathe relief, a shuffling sound came from the corridor outside. Not erratic. Not aggressive. Slow. Deliberate. Nico checked the scanner. 3 signatures. Close. Marla aimed at the door. "They're flanking us." Then silence again. Elias motioned for everyone to stay still. Seconds dragged. The tension grew so thick it was hard to breathe. Suddenly the door creaked open slowly, no force, no slam, just a creak. A grotesque silhouette loomed in the doorway, a figure taller than average, hunched, with skin stretched too tight over its bones and eyes that didn't glow. They watched. "Don't move," Elias whispered. "It's testing us." The creature took a step forward. Marla's finger twitched near the trigger. Celine noticed something strange. "It's not reacting. Almost like it's studying us," Elias finished grimly. Then, as if deciding they weren't worth the effort, the creature turned and walked away, no shriek, no charge. Just a slow retreat into the shadows. "What the hell was that?" Nico whispered. Ivy's voice was faint. "They don't act like the others. They think. They wait. They hunt in packs but differently. Like wolves." Caleb added weakly, "One of them mimicked my voice last night. Called her name." Everyone froze. Even Celine looked shaken. "That's impossible," Marla said. "They don't mimic speech. They're not intelligent." "They are now," Elias cut in. "And we need to get out of this building. Now." With Caleb barely able to walk, Marla constructed a sling out of old cables while Elias scouted the hallway. The infected were gone again, completely. Not even the usual stench of decay hung in the air. Just silence. The squad moved cautiously toward the stairwell leading to the roof, where evac could be possible if Zone D command responded to their signal. But halfway there the building shifted. A loud creak echoed through the walls, followed by a thud from below. "They're driving us upward," Nico realized aloud. "Trapping us." Elias cursed under his breath. "We're not playing their game." He pulled out a flash charge and tossed it down the stairwell. It exploded with a blinding flare, followed by shrieks from below, shadows moving wildly as if the light had disrupted their coordination. "That confirms it," Celine said. "They're light sensitive. But they've learned to avoid it." On the top floor, the roof exit was sealed with chains and reinforced steel. But someone had left a signal flare near the door, used, long burned out. "They knew someone would come here," Marla muttered. "It's bait." Suddenly, the sound of claws scraping against the walls surrounded them. From vents, cracks, even behind broken glass panels, dozens of eyes appeared. Silent. Watching. Waiting. Elias turned to his team, voice calm but urgent. "We hold here. We get that roof door open. We call Zone D. And if they don't answer, we make our stand." Nico opened his comms. "Zone D, this is Vanguard 6. We've found survivors and encountered evolving infected. Request immediate evac or support." Static. Then a single voice came through. "Not from Zone D. Not from any human. We see you. The comm went dead. Everyone looked at Elias. His jaw tightened. Then they'll see what defiance really means. The final stand hadn't begun yet. But in that moment they all understood. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were defenders of the last light in a world choking on shadows. The silence that followed the voice on the radio was thick enough to strangle. No one moved. Not even the wind dared to blow through the rooftop vents. Elias stood frozen, the comm unit still clutched in his gloved hand, static whispering faintly from the speaker like the last breath of a dying world. That wasn't Zone D, Nico said quietly, eyes wide. That thing, it spoke. Celine was already flipping through her field journal, lips moving as she whispered old notes to herself. There were theories, in the early days, about neural retention. About the infected holding on to fragments of language. But that wasn't mimicry. That was awareness. Marla didn't wait for a debate. She knelt by the rusted rooftop door, cutting the chains with a compact torch she'd carried for years. Doesn't matter what it is. We need a way out. Sparks flew, the metal hissed, and the chain dropped with a dull clang. She kicked the door open. Beyond it, a stairwell led to a rusted fire escape. But their window for escape was closing. Below them, the creatures stirred again, their movements heavier now, more deliberate. They were no longer just wanderers. They were a force, a network, and the squad was now in their nest. Caleb groaned as Celine and Ivy helped him up. We'll carry him if we have to, Elias said. Marla, take point. Nico, cover our backs. No one gets left behind. As they stepped onto the fire escape, the city stretched before them, broken, quiet, and smoldering. But even the undead had patterns. The streets weren't empty, they were clearing. Hundreds of the infected were converging inward, toward the building they just left. They're coordinating, Nico said, disbelief in his voice. Like they know we're leaving. A roar broke the stillness, low and guttural, coming from somewhere deep below. It didn't sound human, or even undead. It sounded worse. Like something ancient had awakened beneath the wreckage. Move, Elias ordered. They rushed down the fire escape, each level groaning under their weight. Below, abandoned vehicles and barricades offered minimal cover. Elias scanned for options. There, he said, pointing to a collapsed freeway ramp that led into the city's old monorail tunnel, a passage known in resistance maps as the Spine. It hadn't been used in over a decade, but rumors said it stretched all the way to the border of Zone C. As they reached the ground, the first wave hit. 2 infected burst from an alley, fast, coordinated, and deadly quiet. Marla didn't hesitate, dropping one with a headshot and crushing the second with the butt of her rifle. They're pushing us, she growled. Herding like cattle. Nico flanked left, dropping a flare to illuminate their path as they charged toward the tunnel. The light cast jagged shadows across crumbling concrete, and for a split second Celine saw them, figures waiting at the tunnel entrance. But they didn't rush forward. They simply stood there, motionless as if daring the team to enter. Don't stop, Elias barked. We go through. Ivy hesitated, her grip on Caleb tightening. What if it's another trap? They already know we're here, Elias said. Our only chance is to stay unpredictable. They entered the Spine. The air was thick with mold and rot. Old emergency lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a weak red glow. But it wasn't the darkness that unsettled them, it was the whispers. Faint voices drifted through the tunnel. Familiar. Terrifying. Ivy? A voice cooed, soft and childlike. Ivy froze. That's my mom's voice. Don't listen to it. Celine snapped. They're pulling memories, somehow using emotional cues. The tunnel narrowed, forcing the squad into single file. Ahead, Nico's drone buzzed to life, mapping the path forward. It picked up heat signatures, 6 shapes, unmoving, standing in perfect formation near a derailed monorail car. They're waiting again, Nico whispered. Then we break the line, Elias said. We don't stop. Marla, when we're close, light the way. As they approached the shapes, it became clear. The infected weren't just standing, they were mimicking human stances. One was posed like a soldier, weapon raised. Another, like a medic cradling an invisible patient. The third, was kneeling in prayer. What is this? Celine gasped. Evolution, Elias growled. They're copying what they've seen. They're learning behavior. Marla threw an incendiary charge, the tunnel lighting up in a wall of flame. The creatures howled, finally reacting, but too late. The team sprinted past, flames blocking pursuit. Behind them, the tunnel collapsed slightly from the explosion, slowing the infected. Breathless, bruised, and shaken, The squad emerged from the other side of the tunnel into the foggy outskirts of Sector 8, abandoned, overgrown but untouched. They had escaped for now. Elias turned to the others. Whatever we just faced, it's only the beginning. The dead zones aren't just filled with danger anymore. They're filled with intention. Marla glanced back at the tunnel's entrance. And they're watching every move we make. The defiance that kept humanity alive had just met its most intelligent enemy yet. Asked ChatGPT. The overgrowth swallowed what was left of Sector 8. Nature had reclaimed the ruins, ivy crawling over buildings, trees sprouting through broken concrete, and vines wrapping around skeletons of the old world. Once a bustling evacuation point during the early outbreak, the sector now stood eerily untouched, like a forgotten graveyard preserved in silence. Birds didn't sing here. Insects didn't buzz. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath Elias's boots as he led the squad into the heart of the sector. Nico scanned the area, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool air. No infected heat signatures, he said, puzzled. Which makes no sense. This place should have been crawling with them years ago. Maybe they don't like it here, Marla muttered. Which means we probably shouldn't either. Celine knelt beside an old generator half buried in moss. This is older than what we used in Zone D. Looks like pre-blackout emergency grid equipment. Still intact. She turned a rusted knob, and a soft hum pulsed through the ground. A set of underground floodlights flickered to life around the sector's central square. That's when they saw it. A bunker, reinforced, industrial and partially camouflaged under overgrowth, sat in the center of the square. Its heavy blast door stood half open, as if someone had left in a hurry, or something had come out. Caleb, now able to limp on his own with a crutch fashioned from scrap, pointed toward it. When we first entered the city, we were told not to go near Sector 8. The map labeled it red, but no one explained why. Elias approached the bunker, every muscle in his body on alert. We need to know what's inside. If it's abandoned, we can shelter here for the night. If not, we need to be ready. The team descended the narrow staircase into the bunker, their flashlights slicing through the dark. The air was thick, metallic. Inside, they discovered remnants of a research facility, one far more advanced than anything used in the other sectors. Shelves were lined with canisters of cryogenic samples, sealed vials of unknown liquids and folders with half-burned pages. Celine snatched a few and began reading, her face growing pale. This wasn't just a shelter, she said. It was a classified biolab. They were experimenting on the infected here, enhancing them. Marla cursed. So all those stories about evolution, they didn't just happen. We caused them. It wasn't evolution, Celine continued. It was weaponization. Some kind of controlled mutation protocol. But the files cut off just before the final phase. Nico pulled up a map from an old terminal still barely running. Look, this lab links to other dead zones through underground tunnels. It's all connected. They were moving specimens between sectors. A deep clang echoed through the lower halls, cutting the moment short. Elias raised his weapon. Something else is down here. The team took defensive positions as the sound grew louder, measured, metallic footsteps, not like the chaotic shuffle of typical infected. A door slid open slowly at the end of the corridor, and from the darkness stepped a creature that made everyone's blood run cold. It was humanoid, barely. Its flesh was gray and taut, with patches of armor-like skin plating along its arms and spine. Its eyes were dark but calculating, and worst of all, it didn't growl. It stood silently, observing them, head tilting slightly, thinking. That's not one of the infected, Celine whispered. That's a prototype. The thing moved with speed and precision, lunging at Marla, who barely rolled aside in time. Elias opened fire, the bullet striking its chest, but the creature didn't drop. It adapted, using broken machinery as a shield, rushing again with ruthless precision. Fall back. Elias ordered. Get to the upper level. They scrambled up the stairs, Nico turning mid-run to hurl a flash charge. The explosion lit up the corridor, briefly blinding the creature, but it didn't scream. It simply stopped, crouched and watched them go. Outside, the sky had darkened and distant howls began to rise, not just from one direction but from all around. They've surrounded the sector, Nico said, scanning. Dozens of them, maybe more. And they're not just wandering, they're waiting. Celine, clutching the burned folder, looked at Elias. They were building a new breed down there. Smarter, stronger, impossible to predict. And now they've been let loose. Elias clenched his jaw. Then this sector's not forgotten. It's been hiding the truth. Marla reloaded her weapon. And that truth just found us. As night swallowed Sector 8, the squad dug in, knowing the horde outside was no longer just mindless. They were watching, listening, calculating. The war had changed, and the next attack wouldn't come from instinct. It would come from strategy. Defiance wasn't just survival now, it was resistance against an enemy that had learned how to plan. Ask ChatGPT. Thunder rolled across the night sky as dark clouds gathered above Sector 8, casting everything in deep shadows. Rain began to fall, cold, steady, and unsettlingly quiet, washing over the ruins of the biolab and the cracked pavement where Vanguard Squad 6 now huddled behind makeshift barricades. The streets surrounding them were no longer empty. Shapes moved in the fog, slow and deliberate. But they didn't charge. They didn't scream. They just watched. From his vantage point behind an overturned troop carrier, Elias adjusted his scope, carefully scanning the perimeter. Still no sudden movements, he murmured. They're waiting. Calculating. Celine sat nearby with Caleb and Ivy, her eyes locked on the notes retrieved from the lab. According to these files, the prototype downstairs wasn't alone. There were at least 4 different mutation types developed here. Each one built for a specific function: tracking, breaching, coordination, and manipulation. Marla scoffed from behind a barricade of crates and scrap metal. What the hell does manipulation mean? Mind control? No, Celine said grimly. Behavioral mimicry. One of the test subjects began mimicking human social patterns. It would pretend to panic, pretend to be wounded, even cry. It lured in survivors, and then the others would ambush them. Nico, typing rapidly into his wrist scanner, pulled up drone footage from a scout he had launched moments earlier. I've got visual confirmation. They're circling us in formation, wide arc. But they're not closing in. It's like they're herding us into the center of the sector. They don't want to just kill us, Elias realized. They want to study us, the same way we studied them. As if to confirm his words, the squad suddenly heard movement behind them. Elias spun, weapon ready, but instead of a charging infected they found a corpse. A human. Freshly dead. Wearing a resistance jacket. Propped upright against a crumbling wall. What the hell? Marla approached cautiously. The corpse had no visible bite marks. Its eyes were wide open, frozen in terror. Something killed him without infection, Celine said. But look at this, she pointed to the man's hand. It held a flare, unlit. His radio was tuned to the Vanguard frequency. He was a scout, Elias muttered. One of ours. But we never got his signal. No, Nico said, eyes narrowing. Because they intercepted it. The realization was chilling. These creatures were not just learning behavior, they were intercepting communication. Manipulating signals. Faking distress calls. They led us here, Elias said quietly. The flare, the distress beacon in Sector 9, everything. It wasn't survivors asking for help. It was bait. Ivy's eyes widened in horror. You mean, my brother and I, we were just part of the trap? No, Celine assured her gently. You survived. You're real. But they used your movement to pull us deeper in. Suddenly Nico's drone feed fizzled and cut to static. A single word flashed across his screen: observe. He pulled back from the device like it had burned him. They hacked the drone. Elias stood. Enough. They think they're in control. Let's remind them what human defiance looks like. Marla grinned. I've been waiting all day to blow something up. The team divided quickly. Marla and Nico would plant explosive charges along the eastern alleys where the infected were clustering. Celine and Elias would guide Caleb and Ivy toward an old substation marked on the sector map, a potential extraction point with a long-range signal booster. If they could reach it, they might finally break through to Zone D. Rain drenched them as they moved through narrow alleys, the sound of shifting movement growing louder in the distance. Marla placed her final charge beneath a collapsed bus and gave Nico a thumbs up. He tapped his wrist pad and muttered, boom. A deafening explosion rocked the sector, fire erupting into the sky and sending charred debris across the street. For a moment, the infected broke formation, reacting with shrieks and staggered movement, just long enough for the others to push forward. Celine reached the substation door, her fingers trembling as she accessed the emergency panel. Come on, sparks flew. The panel lit up. The interior lights blinked to life. We're in, she shouted. Inside, the booster console blinked faintly. Celine tuned it to Zone D's primary frequency and hit transmit. This is Vanguard 6. Sector 8 is compromised. We've confirmed intelligent infected, mutated, tactical. We need immediate evac or long-range air recon. Do you copy? Static. Then, copy that Vanguard 6. Hold your position. Reinforcements en route. 15 minutes. A collective sigh of relief swept through the team. But as they regrouped inside the substation, something else caught Elias's attention. A wall covered in maps, hand-drawn, detailed. Not by military personnel, but by someone who had been watching the infected for years. These weren't government maps, he said. Someone was living here, studying them. And they knew what was coming. Celine stared at a final message scrawled across the largest map in red ink. They learned from us. But we never learned from them. Outside the fog grew thicker. The Defiance had only just begun, and now humanity's survival depended on how quickly they could adapt. Ask ChatGPT. The rain turned into a steady downpour, blurring the streets and drowning out the distant moans of the infected. Inside the substation, Vanguard Squad 6 stood in tense silence, weapons ready, eyes darting to every creak in the metal walls. The booster signal had gone through. Zone D had heard them. Reinforcements were coming, 15 minutes. But 15 minutes in dead zone territory might as well have been a lifetime. Outside something moved through the fog. Not fast. Not loud. It didn't need to be. These weren't the wild, snarling infected of the early outbreak. These were the hunters, the evolved ones. Tactical. Quiet. Lethal. Elias crouched beside the door, peering through a cracked window. No sudden charges. No chaos. They're surrounding us like they've done this before. They have, Celine said, studying the maps left by the unknown researcher. These markings, they were tracking patterns. Predicting behavior. And see this. She pointed to a symbol etched beside several locations. Small circles with lines cutting through them. Those are where squads went missing. And in every case the infected didn't swarm. They waited. They're ambush predators now, Nico said grimly. Like jungle cats. Only worse. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his seat, still recovering. How do you fight something that waits for you to make the first mistake? Marla cocked her rifle. Easy. You make it think you made a mistake, and then you shoot it in the face. A sudden metallic clang above interrupted the tension. Everyone froze. A shadow passed over the ceiling, too large and too deliberate to be a stray animal. They're testing the roof, Elias said. Looking for weaknesses. Nico quickly pulled out his signal jammer and placed it by the door. This'll scramble anything trying to intercept our position for now, but it won't last more than a few minutes. Ivy clutched a flare tightly in her fist, her knuckles white. We can't just wait. They're not going to come crashing in like before, are they? No, Elias said. They're going to isolate us. Force us to split. Pick us off one by one. And then, just as predicted, the power flickered. Then died. The lights vanished. The booster console went dark. The air seemed to grow thicker with each passing second. They cut the power, Celine said in disbelief. They know exactly what systems to hit. A soft scraping noise echoed through the vents. Elias motioned for silence. His voice was barely a whisper. Marla, Nico. Hold this floor. Celine and I will check the generator room. Ivy, stay close to your brother. If anything gets through that door, you run. Understand? Ivy nodded, her eyes wide but focused. Understood. Celine and Elias descended a narrow utility stairwell into the basement of the substation. It was pitch black. The air was damp and suffocating. Flashlights flickered as they moved past old transformers and shattered control panels. The generator room was ahead, its door slightly ajar. Elias slowly pushed it open. The generator inside had been ripped apart, clean, almost surgical. Wires severed. Fuel lines drained. As if someone or something had known exactly how to disable it without triggering alarms. Celine knelt beside the fuel tank. Still warm. This just happened. Suddenly, a whisper came from the darkness. Celine. She froze. You left me, remember? It was her sister's voice. From years ago. But Celine's sister had died on day 3 of the outbreak. She slowly backed away, her breath shaking. It's using memories again. Trying to break us mentally. Elias raised his weapon, scanning the corners. Don't listen. Focus. Then, movement. A figure lunged from the shadows, long limbs, spindly but strong, its face twisted in a mock expression of grief. Elias fired twice. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Celine hit the emergency flash on her wrist pad, blinding it with a strobe of light. It shrieked and scrambled back into the vents, retreating like a ghost. "They're inside," Elias growled. "And they're not alone." Back upstairs, Nico's jammer began to spark. "It's overheating. They're jamming us back." Before he could react, a window shattered and another hunter crawled through, slithering unnaturally fast. Marla tackled it, slamming it into the floor, but its strength was inhuman. Ivy lit the flare and threw it. The sudden burst of light sent the creature into a frenzy, long enough for Nico to shoot it through the temple. Heavy silence returned. Celine and Elias burst back through the stairwell door. "They're in the walls," Elias shouted. "We hold this room until evac arrives or we don't hold it at all." Nico glanced at his timer. 6 minutes. 6 minutes. With no power. Surrounded. Hunted. Elias turned to his team. "No more retreating. This is where we make our stand. They think we're scared. Let's prove them wrong." The flare light danced in their eyes as they braced for the next wave. It wouldn't be a horde this time. It would be a test. Of nerves. Of instinct. Of will. And in these final minutes, defiance wasn't a choice anymore. It was their only weapon. Ask ChatGPT. The countdown had become a mantra in Nico's head. 5 minutes. 4. 3. Time slowed in that substation, stretched thin by the silence outside and the sweat pooling on everyone's skin. The storm had worsened, lightning crackling across the sky in crooked veins of light that briefly illuminated the twisted figures moving through the fog. The evolved infected weren't charging. They weren't attacking in waves. They were circling, waiting, calculating their final strike. Inside, every member of Vanguard Squad 6 knew what was coming. This wasn't a fight they could outrun anymore. This was the moment they would either break, or show the undead that humanity wasn't done fighting back. Elias gripped his rifle, standing near the door with eyes cold and focused. "Final positions," he said. "We hold this line no matter what comes through." Marla was already reinforcing the barricades with scavenged metal rods, her jaw clenched. "I've got 2 proximity mines left. If anything crosses those windows, they're done." Caleb, though injured, had picked up a sidearm and sat next to Ivy, ready to protect her with everything he had. "I won't slow you down," he told Elias. "Not now." "You've already earned your place," Elias replied. Celine wiped her hands on her jacket, her voice steady despite the tension. "Whatever those things are planning, they underestimate one thing, we learn too. They may be adapting, but so are we." And then, as if on cue, the silence snapped. From the vents, the floorboards, and the cracks in the ceiling they came. Silent. Precise. Deadly. The first hunter dropped into the center of the room with inhuman grace, its movements unervingly smooth. It didn't scream. It didn't growl. It assessed. Elias fired before it could move again, but it dodged, lightning fast, vaulting over tables and slashing at Celine. She ducked, rolling under its swipe, and shoved a live wire into its back. Electricity surged through the creature, stunning it just long enough for Marla to drive a blade through its skull. That was the signal. Dozens more poured in, crawling on walls, crashing through weakened windows, darting through shadow. But the squad didn't fall. They met the assault with steel, fire, and fury. Marla activated her proximity mines with a click. Time to light them up. The resulting explosions shook the entire structure, flinging creatures backward in torn pieces, their shrieks echoing through the building. Nico flipped a table to shield Ivy and Caleb. 2 minutes to evac, he yelled, blasting a crawler with his sidearm. Celine fired controlled bursts, protecting Elias's flank. "They're faster than last time. They've learned how we aim." "Then don't aim," Elias shouted back. "Surprise them." He tossed a flare into the air, temporarily disorienting several of the infected with a flash of light, then tackled one mid-sprint, slamming its head into the concrete. Blood and rain mixed in the flickering emergency light. More came. One by one. Not as a horde, but as a tactical team. They targeted the wounded. They dodged light. They avoided fire. But the resistance fought harder. Celine set off a charge beneath the staircase as more poured in. "We won't survive another wave," she yelled. And then, the sound of rotors. Distant but real. A spotlight pierced the storm above as a dropship from Zone D broke through the clouds. "This is Falcon 9 to Vanguard 6, ready for immediate extract." Elias's voice roared through the comm, "We need rooftop access now." Nico and Marla forced open the back stairwell door as Elias covered them, blasting 2 infected off the railing. The squad moved as one, coordinated, fast, relentless, fighting their way upward floor by floor, every landing soaked in blood and fire. Ivy led Caleb with unshakable determination. Celine stayed behind them, covering the rear with quick, surgical shots. One final hunter leapt from the stairwell wall, heading for Caleb's throat, only to be caught midair by Elias, who smashed it into the wall with the butt of his rifle. The rooftop door burst open. The dropship hovered just beyond the edge, lowering a ladder through the wind and rain. Marla went first, then Ivy and Caleb, followed by Nico. Celine climbed with blood on her jacket, gasping as she reached the deck. Elias stayed behind, laying cover fire as more of the hunters emerged from the stairwell. "Gio," he shouted. "I'm right behind you." He turned to fire a final burst, then sprinted, leaping onto the ladder just as Celine reached down and grabbed his arm, pulling him up. The infected swarmed the rooftop, but they were too late. The ladder lifted. The dropship rose into the clouds. Below, the evolved horde stood in the storm, watching. Still calculating. Still learning. Inside the dropship, Elias collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. The team was bruised, bloodied, but alive. Celine sat beside him, her voice soft but steady. "They're evolving faster than we ever imagined." Elias nodded. "Then we evolve faster. Because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new war. One where humanity wasn't just fighting to survive, but to outthink the dead." Asked ChatGPT. The dropship soared through the storm-ridden skies, slicing over dead zones, crumbling cityscapes and flooded ruins. Inside, silence hung over Vanguard Squad 6, not from fear but from exhaustion, reflection, and the heavy weight of revelation. They had survived Sector 8. But survival no longer meant safety. It meant facing an enemy that had grown smarter, faster, and infinitely more dangerous. Elias sat near the open ramp, his eyes scanning the landscape below as the rotors roared around him. Every street looked like a grave. Every shadow felt like a waiting ambush. He knew now that the rules of engagement had changed. The undead weren't mindless anymore. They were evolving. And they'd learned one devastating truth: how to think like humans. Celine sat across from him, poring over the notes recovered from the bunker, hands stained with blood and dirt. "They're not mutations anymore," she said quietly. "They're adaptations. Directed ones. Something, or someone, started a chain reaction. And now, it's spreading." "Sector 8 was just the testing ground," Elias muttered. "They let us in because they wanted to see how we react under pressure. They studied our teamwork, our weapons, our behavior. And now they'll use it," Marla added, her voice sharp, eyes never leaving the open door. "Every move we make from here forward, they'll be predicting it, matching it, countering it." The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "Approaching Zone D. Prep for landing. Command wants debrief the second you hit the ground." As the compound came into view, surrounded by high steel walls and blinking spotlights, it looked less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress waiting to fall. Humanity's last line. And even it now seemed vulnerable. The squad disembarked to a chorus of armed escorts and medical teams. But Elias waved off any assistance. "Debrief now. No delay." Inside the war room, high-ranking officials and grim-faced commanders gathered around a central table littered with data, photos, and maps. General Hartley, an old veteran with one arm and zero tolerance for mistakes, stared hard at the returning squad. "We monitored your situation until the signal went dark," he said. "And then we lost you for nearly 30 minutes. We expected corpses. What did you find?" Elias leaned forward, voice steady. "Not corpses, General. We found a new breed. Controlled, strategic, and smarter than anything we've faced before." Celine placed the scorched notes on the table. These came from a classified biolab hidden in Sector 8. Experiments were conducted there, early in the outbreak. The goal wasn't just a cure. It was control. Someone tried to weaponize the infection. "And they succeeded," Marla added. "But it got out. The hunters we fought weren't just accidents of evolution. They're a product of design. And now they're adapting faster than we can record it." A cold silence followed. General Hartley exhaled through his nose. "You're telling me the infected are no longer random threats, they're soldiers?" "Worse," Celine replied. "They're learning to command." A young lieutenant burst through the door, breathless. "Sir, we've just lost contact with Outpost Echo, Sector 12. Last transmission described a coordinated assault. No horde sounds. No alarms. Just silence." Everyone in the room went still. "They've already started spreading beyond 8, Elias said. "And they're targeting quiet zones first, the ones least prepared for psychological warfare." "Then we don't have time to sit on this," Hartley growled. We begin evacuation protocols for border sectors. Prepare drone surveillance over abandoned labs. And Vanguard 6, you're not done. Elias stood tall. What's our mission? Hartley looked him dead in the eye. You're going back out. Into the dead zones. Find the source. Whoever, or whatever, started this mutation chain is still active. And if we don't cut it off now, Zone D becomes the next Sector 8. Marla smirked. Back into hell. Sounds familiar. Celine packed the notes, her expression unreadable. This time we go in knowing what we're up against. Outside, the compound stirred with motion. Troops mobilizing, sirens echoing, convoys prepping for departure. The war was no longer about pushing back the infected. It was about staying one step ahead of an enemy that now had strategy, patience, and memory. As the sun began to rise, casting a weak glow over the shattered remnants of civilization, Elias looked out beyond the walls. Somewhere in the ruins something was watching them. Planning. Waiting for humanity to hesitate again. But there would be no hesitation. Not now. This was no longer just survival. This was resistance, a defiant stand on the new front lines of a war that would determine not just who lived, but who deserved to rebuild the world. And Vanguard Squad 6 would be the tip of that spear. Ask ChatGPT.